صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. ثانية على حب الحسن والحسين، على حب صاحب العصر والزمان. الثالثة بأعلى أصواتكم. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد والثناء لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على خاتم الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا ونبينا محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين، ولعنة الله على أعدائهم ومنكر فضائلهم من الآن إلى قيام يوم الدين. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. ثم أما بعد، فقد قال الله تعالى في كتابه الكريم: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ونريد أن نمن على الذين استضعفوا في الأرض ونجعلهم أئمة ونجعلهم الوارثين. صدق الله العلي العظيم. صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. Respected elders, brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I'd like to begin by extending my warm congratulations to all of you, my dear brothers and sisters, on this sacred day, the 15th of Sha'ban, which coincides with the birth of the final Imam of Ahlul Bayt, Al-Imam Sahib Al-Asri wal-Zaman, Ajjalallahu Ta'ala Farajah. In the limited time that I have with you tonight, my dear brothers and sisters, I'd like to share with you a tradition that is recorded by Shiekh Azhar, Qaddasallah nafsahu sharifa, in his book Kamaluddin wa Tamamun Ni'mah. Shiekh Azhar is one of our most prominent scholars of the early history of Islam, and he wrote many books. One of the books that he wrote was Kamaluddin wa Tamamun Ni'mah, which literally means the completion of faith and the fulfillment of the divine blessing. In this book, he compiles many narrations, many ahadith that speak about the 12th Imam, the signs of the Imam's reappearance, certain character traits of the Imam. So this is a book that essentially revolves around the concept of the Mahdi and the reappearance of the Imam. In this book, Shiekh Azhar, who himself is a scholar of the highest order, he reports the following tradition that outlines the events leading up to the birth of the Imam on the 15th of Sha'ban. The hadith is transmitted to us through Hakima, the daughter of Imam al-Jawad, salawatullahi alayhi. The sister of Imam al-Hadi and the aunt of Imam al-Askari. It was the month of Sha'ban in the year 255 after the Hijrah. Imam al-Askari alayhi salam, at this time in his life, he's in Samarra. The traditions tell us that Hakima was visiting Imam al-Askari on the eve of the 15th of Sha'ban. The Imam alayhi salam, he turns to his aunt and he says to her, and I'll read to you verbatim the conversations that take place. He says to her, Ya Amma, O my dear aunt, Ij'ali إفطارك الليلة عندنا فإنها ليلة النصف من شعبان. He says to her, stay with us tonight and have your iftar in our home on this night, for it is the 15th of Sha'ban. You find that the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam, it was customary among the Ahlul Bayt to observe fast in the month of Sha'ban. And then he tells Hakima, his aunt, وَأَنَّ اللَّهَ سَيُظْهِرُ فِي هَذِهِ اللَّيْلَ الْحُجَّةِ وَهُوَ حُجَّتُهُ فِي أَرْضِهِ. He tells his aunt Hakima, verily Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will reveal His hujjah on this night, and He will be Allah's representative on earth. He's essentially telling his aunt Hakima that I will be granted a child tonight. Hakima, salamullahi alayha, she asks her nephew, Imam al-Askari, Yabna Rasulillah, wa man ummuh? Who is his mother? Because she knows that the Imam, none of his wives had any signs of pregnancy. So the Imam alayhi salam tells her that his mother, the mother of Allah's final hujjah, will be Narjis. She says to the Imam, Ya ibn Rasulullah, ma alayha athar. Narjis does not appear pregnant. There's no sign that she is bearing a child. The Imam alayhi salam tells her, Huwa kama aqulu laki. The Imam alayhi salam says to her that the matter is as I have told you. Tonight there will be a child born who will be the final Imam of Ahlul Bayt, the final representative of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi. Allahumma sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. So Hakima agrees to stay with Imam al-Askari and his family on the eve of the 15th of Sha'ban. Again, she is the one who's reporting this hadith. She says, I went into one of the rooms of the house where Narjis was staying. She says, I opened the door, and as soon as I opened the door and Sayyida Narjis saw me, she stood up to greet me, and she came towards me to remove the slippers from my feet as a gesture of respect, because Hakima was the most noble woman of Bani Hashim at that time. Narjis, she approaches her, tries to remove her slippers. She says to her, Ya Sayyidati wa Sayyidatu Ahli Bayti, Kayfa amsayti? O my mistress and the mistress of this household, how was your evening? Hakima does not allow her to take her slippers. Hakima says to her, Bal anti sayyidati wa sayyidatu ahli. I am not the sayyid of this family anymore. You are the mistress and the most noble woman in this family. So Narjis was taken aback. She says to her, Ya Amma, oh my dear aunt. She would call her aunt out of respect. What do you mean? How am I now the most noble woman in this family? Hakima says to her, Ya Bunayya, oh my daughter, my beloved daughter, Inna Allah sayahabu laki ghulaman sayyidan fi dunya wal akhirah. That, oh my dear daughter, Allah Azza wa Jal, on this night, He will gift you with a child who will be the master of dunya and the master of akhirah. The tradition says that Hakima sat up and she was noticeably shy. She had a lot of haya. Hakima says, I stayed with Narjis the entire night. She says, I went, when the time of Maghrib approached, I went and performed wudu. I prayed Salatul Maghrib and Salatul Isha. I had my iftar, and I laid in bed that night. In the middle of the night, Hakima says, I saw Sayyida Narjis rise up. She went to go do wudu in the middle of the night, and she performed Salatul Layl. People like Sayyida Narjis, Allah Azza wa Jal does not make you the mother of Al-Qa'im unless you're the most spiritually elevated. These are people of Qiyamul Layl. These are people that are always in a state of ablution. There's a story about the mother of Ayatollah Sheikh Ja'far At-Tustari, one of the most legendary scholars of Shia scholarship. He was a very pious man. He was renowned for his knowledge, so much so that people approached his mother to see what is the secret behind this man's upbringing. So they asked her, you gave birth to a legendary scholar, someone whose piety is very rare. How did you bring him up? What was the secret behind the way you brought him up? She says that when I was pregnant with Sheikh Ja'far, I made it a point to always be on wudu. She says, but one night, it was too cold outside, and I remained without wudu for one night during my pregnancy. This is why, listen to this woman, this is why Allah Azza wa Jal gave me Ja'far Tustari instead of Ja'far as-Sadiq. And the idea is what? That to be the womb that carries Allah's hujjah, you have to be a very spiritually refined person. So what's actionable for us when we hear these stories is that, especially for our sisters, when they are bearing children, when they're in the process of conceiving, they should pay attention to being in this spiritual state. It has an effect. It's not only taking prenatal vitamins that's going to give you a healthy child. What you want is to have also a spiritually healthy child. So in any case, the hadith says that Sayyida Narjis wakes up in the middle of the night, performs wudu, and recites Salatul Layl. Now, Hakima again, she continues with the narration. She says, فَوَقَعَ فِي قَلْبِي أَنَّ الْفَجْرَ قَدْ قَرُبْ. The Imam alayhi salam told Hakima that a child will be born on this night, close to the time of Fajr. Hakima is laying in bed, and she says, I felt as though Fajr is approaching. So I got out of bed, فَقُمْتُ لِأَنظُرْ فَإِذَا بِالْفَجْرِ الْأَوَّلِ قَدْ طَلَعَ. That the beginning of dawn was approaching, and there was no birth. She says, فَتَدَاخَلَ قَلْبِ الشَّكُّ مِنْ وَعْدِ أَبِي مُحَمَّدٍ. She says, a small amount of doubt creeped into my heart about what Imam Al-Askari said to me. I thought to myself that maybe it's not going to happen. There's no sign of pregnancy. It's almost Fajr. How is a birth going to take place? She said, the thought crossed my mind. And then from the other room, I heard my nephew say to me, فَنَادَانِ مِنْ حُجْرَتِهِ لَا تَشُكِّي يَا عَمَّهِ. She said, I thought it. And the Imam out loud, he said to me, oh my aunt, do not have doubt that the Qa'im of Al-Muhammad will be born tonight. Hakima says, when I heard Imam Al-Askari alayhi salam say to me, don't have doubt, don't second guess my promise, She said, I felt embarrassed. So I returned to check on Narjis. The time of Fajr is approaching. Suddenly, Sayyida Narjis begins to experience the pains of labor. Hakima stands up, she rushes to her. She says, Ismullahi alayki. She starts reciting the names of Allah. The names of Allah are a source of protection for us. She says, Ijma'i nafsaki wajma'i qalbaki. She says to Narjis, calm down, relax. The tradition says that she put a pillow in the middle of the room. And Hakima says, فَقَبَضَتْ عَلَى كَفِّي. Narjis, salamullahi alayha, she started to hold the hand of Hakima. Hakima says she was squeezing my hands. ثُمَّ أَنَّتْ أَنَّ وَتَشَهَدَتْ. She was experiencing pain and she was reciting الشهادتين. She was reciting La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah. La basallu ala Muhammad. As she's reciting the kalima, Imam Al-Askari alayhi salam in the other room, he tells his aunt, فَصَاحَ بِي Abu Muhammad. Abu Muhammad is the kunya of Imam Al-Askari. اقرأي عليها إنا أنزلناه في ليلة القدر. Imam Al-Askari alayhi salam, he tells Hakima, recite Surah Al-Qadr. And inshallah, perhaps tomorrow we'll speak about what is the relationship between Surah Al-Qadr and the 12th Imam. So she begins reciting Inna anzalnahu fi laylatil qadr. Hakima says, فَأَقْبَلْتُ أَقْرَأُ عَلَيْهَا كَمَا أَمَرَنِي. Hakima says, I began reciting Surah Al-Qadr as the Imam had instructed me. فَأَجَابَنِ الْجَنِينُ مِنْ بَطْنِهَا يَقْرَأُ كَمَا أَقْرَأُ. Hakima says, when I was reciting Surah Al-Qadr, the child, the fetus in the womb was reciting with me. Brothers and sisters, when we hear some of these stories, they may seem difficult to accept. We may think that these are exaggerations, but inshallah in a few moments I'll share with you some Quranic verses where Allah essentially tells us there's a precedent for this. When I bring my awliya into this world, sometimes I do it in a miraculous way as confirmation that they belong to me, that they are my representatives. So Hakima says, when I was reciting Surah Al-Qadr and the child in the womb was reciting with me, I was frightened. I became startled. The hadith says, Imam Al-Askari alayhi salam says, La ta'jabi min amrillah. Imam says to his aunt Hakima, do not be amazed at Allah's decree. Inna Allah yuntiquna bil hikmati sigara. Allah puts wisdom on our tongues when we are young, we Ahlul Bayt. And He makes us His hujjaj when we are older. The hadith continues. Hakima says, for a few moments, this is all reported in Shiekh As-Saduq's book, Kamaluddin wa Tamamun Ni'mah. Hakima says, I was suddenly unable to see Narjis. When I was assisting her with the labor process, suddenly I couldn't see. It's as though there was a hijab between me and Narjis. I was not able to see her. So I ran to Imam Al-Askari alayhi salam to tell him that something is happening. I'm not able to see her. The Imam alayhi salam told me to return. So I returned back to the room with Narjis, And she says that I saw Narjis at that moment enshrouded with light. She says, وَإِذَا أَنَا بِهَا وَعَلَيْهَا مِنْ أَثَرِ النُّورِ مَا غَشَّى بَصَرِي. She says when she was actually giving birth, there was so much nur in that room that I was blinded by it. And she says, وَإِذَا أَنَا بِوَلِيِّ اللَّهِ مُتَلَقِّيًا الْأَرْضَ بِمَسَاجِدِ وَعَلَى ذِرَاعِهِ الْأَيْمَنِ مَكْتُوبٌ جَاءَ الْحَقُّ وَزَهَقَ الْبَاطِلُ إِنَّ الْبَاطِلَ كَانَ زَهُوقًا. Hakima says, when the 12th Imam was born, he immediately, his limbs touched the earth, and he positioned himself in the posture of sajda. And she says the child was reciting, أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وأن محمدا رسول الله وأن أبي أمير المؤمنين ولي الله. She says he was mentioning one Imam after another until he reaches himself. And he says, the hadith says, إِلَىٰ أَنْ بَلَغَ إِلَىٰ نَفْسِهِ. He mentions Ma'soom after Ma'soom until he reaches himself. And he ثُمَّ قَالَ اللَّهُمَّ أَنْجِزْ لِي مَا وَعَدْتَنِي. Oh Allah, allow me to fulfill my mission. وَأَتْمِمْ لِي أَمْرِي. And allow me to complete my task. وَثَبِّتْ وَطْأَتِي. And establish my feet, make me steadfast. وَامْلَئِ الْأَرْضَ عَدْلًا وَقِسْطًا بِي. And allow me to fulfill the earth with justice and equity. Hakima says, I took the child. You know, when a child is born, usually you have to cleanse it. You have to remove the impurities. Hakima says, I held this child and the child was pristine, clean. There was nothing that needed to be removed. At that moment, Imam Al-Askari, salawatullahi alayhi, enters the room. He enters and he says, Halummu ilayya waladi. Give me my son. The tradition says that he held Imam Sahib al-Zaman a few moments after his birth, and the Imam started to place his hand. He was stroking the head of the child and the face of the child, and Imam says to his newborn son, Takallam ya bunay. O my son, speak. فَتَشَهَّدَ الشَّهَادَتَيْنِ. Again, the shahadatain is recited. وَصَلَّى عَلَى النَّبِيِّ وَالْأَئِمَّةِ الطَّاهِرِينَ وَاحِدًا وَاحِدًا. Again, the new child recites salawat upon all of the ma'sumin of the Ahlul Bayt, and then he recites the ayah that I began with. He says, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Surah 28 verse 5. This ayah was recited on the day of the Imam's birth by the Imam. وَنُرِيدُ أَن نَمُنَّ عَلَى الَّذِينَ اسْتُضْعِفُوا فِي الْأَرْضِ وَنَجْعَلَهُمْ أَئِمَّةً وَنَجْعَلَهُمُ الْوَارِثِينَ. We wish to bestow our favor upon those who have been oppressed in the land, and we wish to make them imams, and we wish to make them the inheritors of the earth. Imam Al-Askari then tells Hakima, take the child back to his mother. Ya amma ruddihi ila ummi kay taqarra aynuha wa la tahzan وَلِتَعْلَمَ أَنَّ وَعْدَ اللَّهِ حَقٌّ. Take the child back to its mother so she can be delighted to see him, and so she can know that the promise of Allah is indeed true. Now, brothers and sisters, when we read traditions like this, we may label them as fantastical, as exaggerations. But it's interesting that when you look at the Holy Quran, this is not the first time a divinely chosen servant of Allah speaks at their birth. There is a Quranic precedent for this. In who? In Isa alayhi salam. There are two occasions in the Quran where Isa ibn Maryam speaks at his birth. In Surah Maryam, for example, when he's born, he says to his mother, فَنَادَاهَا مِن تَحْتِهَا. How old is Isa alayhi salam? A few moments old. فَنَادَاهَا مِن تَحْتِهَا أَلَّا تَحْزَنِي قَدْ جَعَلَ رَبُّكِ تَحْتَكِ سَرِيًّا. Allah has made a stream flow between your legs, beneath you, because she's in the middle of the desert. There's water there. وَهُزِّ إِلَيْكِ بِجِذْعِ النَّخْلَةِ تُسَاقِطْ عَلَيْكِ رُطَبًا جَنِيًّا. And shake the palm tree, dates will fall, fresh dates. Who's speaking to her? Is there a nursing staff with Maryam alayhi salam? It's only her child. Isa ibn Maryam from the Quran, in the Holy Quran, is speaking. And this is a proof of his nubuwwah. Some ulama say no, this is actually Jibreel who's speaking to Maryam. Even if we accept that this is Jibreel, there's another ayah where it's clearly Isa alayhi salam. When Maryam alayhi salam returns to her community and Bani Israel see the chaste, the Virgin Mary holding a child, you can imagine the suspicion in their eyes. They say to her, "What is this, O Maryam? You come from a noble family. You come from a pious, righteous family." She doesn't respond. فَأَشَارَتْ إِلَيْهِ. She pointed at this newborn child, and they say to her, كَيْفَ نُكَلِّمُ مَنْ كَانَ فِي الْمَهْدِ صَبِيًّا. How can we speak to a child that is so young? قَالَ إِنِّي عَبْدُ اللَّهِ آتاني الكتاب وجعلني نبيا وجعلني مباركا أينما كنت وأوصاني بالصلاة والزكاة ما دمت حيا. She pointed at him and he spoke, saying, "I am Allah's servant." You know, it's ironic that the man whose first words is "I am Abdullah" is attributed divinity later on in his life. You see the tragedy of human history? A man whose first words were "I am Abdullah," and he is considered God himself. You find that the Quran, brothers and sisters, gives us a very clear example of a child who speaks at birth. Now, why does Allah do this? This shows us, brothers and sisters, how anxious Allah is to guide us. How eager Allah is, how much effort is put in to make the truth clear to us. This is why Isa speaks when he's a child. This is why Imam Sahib al-Asr wa Zaman is speaking on the day of his birth. So there's no ambiguity. Allah wants to make haqq clear. He doesn't want to leave room for excuses on the day of Qiyamah. You find, brothers and sisters, not only do we have a precedent in the Quran for newborns who speak. In fact, Imam Sahib al-Zaman is not the first member of Ahlul Bayt to speak at birth. There are Sunni traditions that tell us that when Lady Khadija, salawatullahi alayha, la sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. When Lady Khadija was pregnant with Lady Fatima alayhi salam, People were saying about the Holy Prophet that he's a magician, he's a liar. Khadija alayhi salam would become disturbed when she would hear the Holy Prophet being slandered. So she would say, "Wa khaybata man kadhaba Muhammada." Indeed, those who slander the Holy Prophet, who reject his nubuwwah, are at loss. فَنَادَتْ فَاطِمَةٌ. These are ahadith that are recorded by Sunni ulama. فَنَادَتْ فَاطِمَةٌ مِنْ بَطْنِهَا. The hadith says that Fatima responds in the womb of her mother, and she consoles her mother, saying what? يَا أُمَّا لَا تَحْزَنِي فَإِنَّ اللَّهَ مَعَ أَبِي. O my mother, do not grieve, for Allah is with my father. The Quran tells us that Isa spoke at birth. Ahadith in Sunni sources tell us that Lady Fatima was able to speak in the womb of her mother and console her mother. So you find that the birth of the 12th Imam, my dear brothers and sisters, on the eve of the 15th of Sha'ban was kept secret. The pregnancy of Sayyida Narjis was concealed. In fact, the Imam alayhi salam was born at a time when even the soldiers that were surrounding the house of the Imam were asleep. The Imam alayhi salam, and this is a sacred night, my dear brothers and sisters. The 15th of Sha'ban was a sacred night even before the birth of the 12th Imam. We have a hadith from Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq salawatullahi alayhi. Allahumma salli ala, where he says, لا يولد مولود فيها إلا كان مؤمنا وإن ولد في أرض الشرك نقله الله إلى الإيمان ببركة الإمام المهدي. Imam as-Sadiq alayhi salam, he says, any child that is born on the eve of Sha'ban at the time where the 12th Imam was born, Allah Azza wa Jal will give that child the tawfiq of hidayah, even if he's born in a part of the world that's non-Muslim. Imam as-Sadiq says, in honor of the 12th Imam, those who are born at that time, Allah will give them the tawfiq of hidayah. So you find that when the Imam alayhi salam is born, Imam al-Askari has to inform the Shia and the Muslim community that the 12th is born. But the Imam alayhi salam doesn't have a minbar where he can go out and announce. Because again, the Imam alayhi salam is in a garrison town. He's in a military zone. He's being monitored. So the Imam alayhi salam has to strategically deliver the message that the Qa'im has been born. And he has to make it clear that this is an Imam, not just another child, because the Imams can have multiple children. He has to signal to them that not only was a child born to me, but this child is the 12th Imam. So what does the Imam do? The Imam alayhi salam cleverly reveals to the Shi'as that the 12th Imam has been born because he does something unique with the Aqiqah. Aqiqah, my dear brothers and sisters, is the sunnah of Rasulullah, whereby there is an animal sacrifice that is made on the 7th day after the birth of the child. An animal is slaughtered, the meat is distributed to the believers, and they eat and they pray for the well-being of the child. This is mustahab. When Imam al-Hasan and Imam al-Husayn salawatullahi alayhima, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad, when they were born, Rasulullah slaughtered 2 rams, 2 sheep as their aqiqah. And the idea is that this aqiqah is a symbolic ransom for the child. It's meant to protect the life of the child. There's a hadith from Imam As-Sadiq alayhi salam where he says, كُلُّ مَوْلُودٍ مُرْتَهَنٌ بِالْعَقِيقَةِ. Every child is ransomed for their aqiqah, for that animal sacrifice. Imam Al-Askari alayhi salam performs an unprecedented aqiqah. Usually you sacrifice one sheep or one camel or one animal as an aqiqah for the child. Maybe two, maybe three. Imam Al-Askari, what does he do? The aqiqah that he sacrifices, the number is 300 sheep he sacrifices. Why does the Imam do this? For two reasons. Ahlul Bayt tell us that the aqiqah is a symbolic ransom for the child, and it's meant to protect the life of the child. So one animal equals the lifespan of the human being, roughly. The Imam alayhi salam, he knows that this son of his is not going to live an ordinary life. He's not going to live 70, 80 years whereby one aqiqah, two aqiqah is enough. What does he do? He sacrifices enough sheep to secure the long life that his son will live. Secondly, by doing this aqiqah, an aqiqah this large, it also signals in an indirect way to the followers of Ahlul Bayt that the Qa'im, Ajjalallahu Ta'ala Farajahu Sharif, has been born. Other traditions tell us that Imam Al-Askari reaches out to some of his closest companions and he informs them, purchase 10,000 loaves of bread and a large amount of meat and distribute it among the believers and tell them that my son has been born. When they see this level of generosity, they will know that the 12th has been born. Imam Al-Askari alayhi salam was very careful about who he allowed to see the 12th Imam. Now, as you know, brothers and sisters, Bani Umayyah, Bani Abbas, they were all familiar with the concept of the Mahdi. They knew that Rasulullah said, Al-Khulafa'u min ba'di ithna ashar, that the rightful khulafa after me are 12. And they know that number 11 is under house arrest. So there's a watchful eye around the residence of Imam Al-Askari alayhi salam. Therefore the Imam alayhi salam secretly delivers a letter to one of his closest companions by the name of Ahmad ibn al-Hasan ibn Ishaq al-Qummi. In the letter he says to him, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, a very brief letter, وُلِدَ لَنَا مَوْلُودٌ. He says, a child has been born to me. Notice, he doesn't say it's Imam Sahih. He's very discreet in the letter. A child has been born to me. فَلْيَكُنْ عِنْدَكَ مَسْتُورًا. I would like for you to keep it confidential. وَعَنْ جَمِيعِ النَّاسِ مَكْتُومًا. He will be unseen to the rest of people. فَإِنَّا لَمْ نُظْهِرْ عَلَيْهِ إِلَّا الْأَقْرَبِ لِقَرَابَتِهِ. We have not allowed only the closest relatives to see him. وَالْوَلِيِّ وِلَايَتِهِ. And those who have the strongest wilayah, we've allowed them to see this child. أَحْبَبْنَا إِعْلَامَكَ لِيُسِرَّكَ اللَّهُ بِهِ مثل ما سرنا به. I wanted to inform you of his birth and give you the delight of his birth in the same way that his birth delighted us. Wassalam. And then the Imam alayhi salam, a few days before his death, a few days before the death of Imam Al-Askari, he's able to manage a meeting with 40 of the seniors of the Shia community. Now, how was this meeting arranged under those conditions? Allahu A'lam. 40 men gather at the residence of Imam Al-Askari alayhi salam. Many of them, the government probably didn't even know that they were Shia. They gather in the home of the Imam. The hadith says, عرض علينا, the companions of Imam Al-Askari report, عرض علينا Abu Muhammad Al-Hasan ibn Ali. Imam Al-Askari presented to us his son, who was only a few years old. And we were 40 men in the house. فقال, he turned to us and he said to us, هذا إمامكم من بعدي. This is the Imam after me. وخليفتي عليكم, and this is the Khalifa that will be after me. أطيعوه ولا تتفرقوا. Obey him and do not be disunited. أما إنكم لا ترونه بعد يومكم هذا. Look at him now, because after this day you will not see him again. The companions say that we saw this child who had the resemblance of Rasulullah, who had the resemblance of Amir al-Mu'mineen. We saw him, and after we left, a few days later, Imam Al-Askari alayhi salam passed away, and we never saw that child again. He entered into Al-Ghaybatu Sughra. Tomorrow night, brothers and sisters, inshallah, we're going to discuss the concept of ghaiba from the Holy Quran. And we will give examples of how there were many prophets mentioned in the Quran who experienced ghaiba. So this ghaiba is not a new phenomenon. In fact, it is the sunnah of Allah Azza wa Jal with His divinely chosen servants. We ask Allah Azza wa Jal to bless us and guide us and illuminate our hearts with the teachings of Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad. Allahumma aghfir lil mu'minina wal mu'minat, المسلمين والمسلمات الأحياء منهم والأموات تابع اللهم بيننا وبينهم بالخيرات إنك مجيب الدعوات إنك قاضي الحاجات إنك على كل شيء قدير. Brothers and sisters, today is a very sacred day. There are many who are in need of our prayers. Let us all recite in the loudest of our voices, أمن يجيب المضطر. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. أمن يجيب أمن يجيب أمن يجيب أمن يجيب المضطر إذا دعاه ويكشف السوء أمن يجيب المضطر إذا دعاه ويكشف السوء. يا الله 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 نسألك بحق محمد وعلي وفاطمة والحسن والحسين والتسعة المعصومين من ذرية الحسين فرج عنا يا الله فرجا عاجلا قريبا كلمح البصر أو أقرب من ذلك. اللهم كن لوليك الحجة صلواتك عليه وعلى آبائه وليا وحافظا وإلى أرواح المؤمنين والمؤمنات ومن مات على ولاية أمير المؤمنين رحم الله من قرأ السورة المباركة الفاتحة مسبوقة بالصلاة على محمد وآل محمد.